Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the true crime case and the murder of Tia Sharp. Tia was a 12-year-old girl. She lived with her mother, Natalie, and two younger brothers in Croydon, London in England. I'd just like to give my normal disclaimer that I mean no offence to anyone I'm going to talk about today. I've just gathered the information off the internet, compiled it into a video, and it's for educational purposes. Tia was really close with her mother and her grandmother. They were kind of like the three amigos in a sense. And Tia was always the loudest in the room. She was always so confident, singing. She always spoke her mind and let people know what she was thinking. She also really easily made friends. She was just that kind of person. When Tia was just 2 years old, her mother met a man named Stuart Hazel. He was 27 years old at the time and was older than Natalie. And their relationship didn't last very long. It only lasted a couple of weeks. But then Stuart then got together with Natalie's mother, Christine. People may think this is a bit strange, but because the relationship had only lasted a couple of weeks, she didn't really find it that strange because Stuart was really good for her mother and Natalie accepted him as part of the family. And Christine and Stuart actually was together for at least 10 years. So for the purpose of this video, I'll call Christine and Stuart Tia's grandparents. Stuart was actually Tia's step-grandfather, but as she was growing up, she was always really close to him. And she did stay over a lot at her grandparents' house, especially when her young brothers came along. The house that they lived in didn't have that much room, and they shared a room. So when she would go and stay at her grandparents, she had her own room, they had a PlayStation. They were always really fun, and she could just kind of enjoy her own space and her own time, doing whatever she wanted to do. And a lot of the time, her grandmother actually worked night shifts. So when she would stay over, she was left with Stuart, her grandfather. And this was never a problem. She absolutely adored him. So much so that on her 12th birthday, when she was allowed one friend to come over, she actually picked Stuart over her school friends, for example, to celebrate her birthday with. In August 2012, Tia messaged her grandparents to see if she could stay over for a few days. Stuart replied to this, replying to Natalie, her mother, saying, "It's not a problem if Tia wants to stay, but obviously her grandmother will be on a night shift, so if you're okay with it and she's okay with it, she'll just be spending the days with me." On the 2nd of August 2012, Natalie took Tia to the tram, which she would then get, and on the other side, she would then be met by Stuart. He took her out shopping, they enjoyed the day, and then they went back home. Christine even rang home from work to see how they were getting on, and Stuart answered and said he'd made her tea. They were playing on the PlayStation, they were having a real fun time. She could even hear Tia in the background laughing and giggling. The next day, Christine came home from work after a shift and Tia wasn't around, so Stuart told her that she had gone to town to meet a friend and buy some shoes. When it got to around 6 PM that night, Christine began to worry, so thinking that obviously maybe she's lost track of time, whatever, or maybe she's contacted her mum, she rang Natalie to see whether she had contacted her or whether she knew where she was. Maybe Tia had actually gone home instead of coming back to her grandparents or something like that. But Natalie hadn't heard anything of her. And that's when panic really started to set in. So all three of them, they went out and they looked for Tia around the streets, around everywhere, to try and see if they could find her. It was when it got to about 10 o'clock at night, and obviously it started going dark outside. They needed more help than they were getting, so they went to the police to file a missing persons report. And the police, like they should be, were quite interested in Stuart because obviously he was the last person to see her. They went through the routine. He made her breakfast. They played on the PlayStation for a little while, and that's when she then left to go meet a friend. And he said that was the last time he saw her. One of his neighbours actually also confirmed this. He had seen Tia leaving the house, walking down the drive, so this backed up what he was saying. The police, like they would do in any other missing case, searched the grandparents' house. That was where she was last. They actually found her phone, which was immediately strange to the police. She'd gone out to meet a friend. Why didn't she take a phone? Usually you would go out and text them and say, "I'm here, where are you," whatever, but she'd left it at home. Maybe she could have just forgotten it though, because I mean, I've left my house numerous occasions and actually forgot to take my phone. So although it is strange, it's not impossible that that could have happened. The next day, the search for Tia became national news, with her mother and grandparents at the forefront of the investigation. They printed t-shirts, banners, posters, they did media appeals. They did everything they could in their power to try and find missing Tia. 4 days went by and there was still no sign of her. Her uncle David actually appeared on TV appealing for her to come home for her return. There were actually 55 sightings reported in the first few days of her disappearance, but none of them actually turned out to be Tia. Over 800 hours of CCTV was collected from the streets, around the area she would have walked around, the buses, any transport that they could that she may have gotten on, just to try and piece together her last known whereabouts. But she wasn't actually seen on any of this footage. In fact, pretty much the last time she was captured on CCTV was when she met Stuart at the tram station and in the shopping centre shopping. Those were the last images that were captured of her. So it was very strange for her to not be caught on any CCTV anywhere, not on any of the buses, any public transport, because obviously you walk, if you don't catch the bus, you're going to walk along the streets to get to the town centre. You're going to be caught on something. It's pretty difficult to not be caught on any footage anywhere. And like I said, Stuart and the neighbour had confirmed that she did definitely leave the house, so why was she not seen on any of the CCTV? The police do kind of look into a few options when someone goes missing. The main ones that they kind of start with are things like kidnap, the fact that this person may have ran away, and they also look at the family because a lot of crimes that are committed are actually, unfortunately, committed by family members. So obviously they do look into these aspects quite thoroughly. Because of this, they decided to search her grandparents' house again. And this time they decided to bring in dogs to find out anything that they maybe missed last time. These dogs were trained to find any cadavers or blood. And again, the dogs didn't find anything. There was still nothing in Tia's grandparents' house to suggest that they had any involvement in a disappearance whatsoever. 6 days after Tia's disappearance, on the 9th of August, Stuart decided to make a public appeal. He was the last person to see her, so the police did focus on him heavily, and he was a suspect, like any of them would be. Christine was a suspect, but he didn't like it. He didn't like the fact that he was being scrutinised so thoroughly. So he decided to kind of clear his name and prove his innocence. He would go on appeal for Tia's return. So he did defend himself, but he also begged for Tia to come home. If she had run away, they wouldn't be angry, they just wanted her back. If someone had taken her, just please bring her back. Her family was missing her so much and they just wanted her home.
As I was hoovering, then she walked past me from the front room to go out. And she walked out the front door, that is all I know.
After the interview, the police did get body language experts in to just review how he was acting on the TV. They would just go over how he came across whilst pleading for his loved one to come home. And what they found was really strange. He kind of looked animated and exaggerated and really like he was trying to convince someone of what he was saying was true. Stuart would do things like shrug his shoulders a lot when he was portraying a true statement, or what he said was a true statement. So shrugging your shoulders is generally widely seen as I don't know or I'm not sure. So why was he shrugging his shoulders when he was telling us a statement that was true? It was just a bit weird. And also, Stuart recanted his entire day with Tia to perfection. Now, some people generally would miss things out and then possibly jump back to them and say, oh, I forgot to mention this. Things like that, because somebody who was distressed and distraught at the family member going missing probably would miss things out, but he didn't.
I've hurried all the way out to the front door, literally the kitchen, the hallway. I've got out there, I've come back with another cigarette. This time I've gone upstairs, got the washing, after I've done the whole way there, I've gone upstairs, done the washing, make sure there's no washing upstairs, made the bed, opened the curtains, come back downstairs. By then Tia's going upstairs to get changed.
Instead, his story kind of seemed rehearsed. He blinked around 40 to 45 times a minute, and that is double what it should normally be, so that kind of suggests that he was anxious. He also would do things like looking down to his right side. Now, looking to your right means that you're using the part of the brain that allows you to picture something in your head. If you're recalling a memory, you will look up and to your left. And like I said, he wasn't doing this. It seemed like he was making things up on the spot. And as a result of these findings, the police decided to search the house for a fourth time. This time, they were going to bring in a forensics team to scour everything and maybe find any DNA or any blood that they didn't initially find. So essentially, Stuart had done this interview to try and clear his name, but what it resulted in was them becoming more suspicious of him. With how his body language came across, it kind of backfired. And the vibe he was giving off was not the grieving grandfather that he should have been. It was on the 10th of August in 2012 when the couple, Christine and Stuart, woke up in the morning. Christine had said that Stuart decided he was going to go out and get a paper, so he left. As Christine was getting up, she noticed this strange smell that was travelling throughout her house. So she tried to locate the smell. She cleaned out the fridge, she cleaned the bins, she looked all around the house thinking that maybe some food or something was left somewhere and it was making this horrible stench. She even went as far as to check the drains and things like that because she just didn't know where the smell was coming from. And a few hours later, the police and the forensics team turned up at her house and she informed the police of this strange smell that she was smelling. So they came in, they smelled it for themselves, and this is when they got a bit worried. They evacuated the house and sent the forensics teams in. They followed this smell to the attic. And it was there, pushed right under to one side, under the eaves, as far as it could go. They found the body of Tia Sharp. She was wrapped up in a black bedsheet, which was then covered with black bags and taped so tightly to try and conceal any smells that would have come out of it. Around about this time, she'd been missing for a week. So her body was up there in the heat, decomposing. This method that the killer had used just stopped working, and that's why the smells were coming out. They found her clothes in a bag in the attic, and in a second bag they found her broken glasses. They also found 2 SD memory cards when they searched the house. One was in the kitchen, one had actually been pushed into a door frame to try and conceal it. Whatever was on these SD cards, they certainly didn't want anybody looking at. They didn't want them to find it. They obviously took these to the police station to look at later. Tia's body had been there, like I said, for over a week, just 12 foot above her family members that loved her so dearly that were trying to find her. They were so desperately searching for her when all along she was above their heads in the attic of her grandparents' house. When they took her for post-mortem, they actually had to identify her through her dental records. Now, this was because her body was that badly decomposed. She was basically not recognisable. They couldn't really use the traditional identification process whereby a family member goes to say, yes, that is my daughter or my son, and they confirm their identity that way, because it was just impossible with Tia. And because of this, they couldn't determine her cause of death. It was classed as uncertified. They did actually believe that she was smothered or she had some sort of chest compressions that was her actual cause of death, but there wasn't actually evidence to enable them to determine a certain cause of death. There was no evidence of broken bones or brain hemorrhaging. And again, because the decomposition was that bad, the police actually made the decision to not let Natalie see the body. They thought that Natalie seeing her daughter in such a way that it would probably scar her, and they were probably right. And it's just awful to think what she actually must have looked like for them to make such a decision. If you recall a little earlier on, Stuart in the morning had left for a newspaper. Well, he never returned, and this made him the police's only suspect. He had left in the morning on the day he knew that the forensics team were coming around, and he didn't come back. And this was just as the smell of Tia's body had started circulating the house. So he must have been able to smell it in the morning. Christine smelled it. He must have been able to smell it. He knew the forensics were coming around. He knew that there was no choice, that they would find it. They immediately put out a London-wide search for Stuart Hazel. These were put out on the news, the radio, and word quickly got round that he was the main suspect in the case. And again, people knew his face because just the day before, he'd been on his interview proclaiming his innocence and asking for Tia to be returned safely. Obviously, people knew what he looked like because of this. A call shortly came in and he was spotted at a corner shop trying to buy vodka. He was already really intoxicated, and because obviously he was in the news and things like that, they phoned the police immediately. But when the police actually arrived, Stuart had already gone. It's not like the shop owner can lock the doors and keep him there, so he had left. This is when they brought in dogs, and they caught his scent and followed it all the way to where Stuart was lying in some bushes drinking the rest of his vodka. Stuart Hazel was arrested on suspicion of the murder of Tia Sharp along with Tia's grandmother Christine, because they thought that both of them had something to do with it, basically. It only took a few days and Christine was released due to lack of evidence, and eventually her name was cleared fully. She didn't have anything to do with her granddaughter's murder. Stuart was questioned, by which he changed his story. What else could he do at this point? He was now stating that when they were playing, Tia actually fell down the stairs. So he said that he was drunk, he was on cannabis, he was high and intoxicated, and Tia fell down the stairs, and shortly after, a couple of minutes later, he actually blanked out. And then when he woke up in the morning, Tia's body was still there. She'd sadly passed away. So because he was frightened, he didn't want to tell her mother and his partner Christine, her grandmother, that their granddaughter at 12 had passed away, and he felt guilty because he was, again, high and drunk, that he wasn't watching her. So he decided to hide her body. He undressed her, he wrapped her body in the sheet, he put the black bags around, taped it up to try and conceal any smells, and then he shoved her in the attic along with her belongings and tried to hide her under the eaves. So his step-granddaughter, that he loved so dearly, had just accidentally died, and his reaction was to put her in a bag and hide her body. I don't think so, Stuart. And not only that, surely if she would have fallen down the stairs, say maybe his story was true, she would have a broken bone, or at least some hemorrhaging on her brain if she'd hit her head to cause her to die, but she had nothing. So going back to the SD cards that the police recovered from the house, everything became clear. They found extensive pornography featuring young girls, and there were hundreds and hundreds of them. Tia was on them, other young girls, even Stuart himself. Most of these young girls looked similar to Tia and were of a similar age. And clearly he had an attraction to young girls that possibly were not only a similar age to Tia, but actually looked like her too. Like I said, there were some videos of Tia. Now there was one where she was sat on the sofa, innocently rubbing moisturiser into her legs, and he was sat there filming her. And she didn't have a clue. So she was totally unaware of the predator that was watching her. Her own grandfather, as she thought of him, that supposedly loved her like his own. I just find this completely disgusting. The fact that this poor 12-year-old girl was just acting normal like you would do in life. You would moisturise your legs on a sofa. Nobody would see anything wrong with that, and neither did she. But in his eyes, because he was this predator, he saw it in a sexual way. This 12-year-old girl trusted him. She loved him. And she even called him Grandad because that's how she saw him. He brought her up from the age of 2 as his own, and then he betrayed her and took her life. Another couple of videos of Tia sleeping, and there were 11 still shots of her actually asleep. And this just creeps me out so much, to think that she was just asleep in her own bed, in her own room, and he's come in and began filming her and watching her. And he was just kind of exerting his power over her in a sense. And she just had no idea that he was attracted to her and that he was doing these sorts of things. There were also videos of Stuart performing sexual acts on himself using various things around the house. And one of these things was actually a vibrator. Now, this vibrator was found and tested, and it actually came back with the blood of Tia on it. And this then proved that there was a sexual nature to his crime, which obviously the police were already leaning towards anyway, but this just kind of certified it. Whilst looking through his search history, they found things like rape porn and just other really inappropriate interests. The last image contained on the SD card was of Tia, or so it is believed, and when this was analysed, due to the mottling on the back of her thighs, they believe that she was already dead when it was taken. And this was just utterly disgusting what he did. So not only has he murdered his own step-granddaughter, he's then taken the body, put her face down on the bed, which obscured her face, and then put her in a sexually posing position and took this photo from a very specific angle. And he probably would have got sexual gratification from this image even after a murder when everyone was looking for her. Looking into this case, I did find it really disturbing. In May 2013, his trial began and he, of course, pleaded not guilty. He not once looked at Natalie or Christine in the eye. I guess he just couldn't face it. He knew he was guilty. When the images of Tia were shown in court, Natalie, amongst others, just had to leave. They couldn't stay in there. Natalie was actually helped out of court. She was crying her eyes out and she actually shouted back to him, "I hope he rot." Seeing the awful things that he'd done to his granddaughter of 10 years was just simply too much to bear for the courtroom. Stewart then decided to change his plea. He changed it to guilty. I guess he really didn't want his story to be kind of cross-analysed and picked apart, because with the evidence and the images and all things like that, they just knew he was guilty. So he decided to change his plea. Basically, it's believed that Stewart had made maybe sexual advances towards Tia. She obviously rebuffed him and then probably said, "I'm going to tell Mum, I'm going to tell somebody about it." And because of this, he then murdered her. And this actually took place between 3 AM to 6 AM on the 2nd, 3rd of August. They believed he moved the body to the bed, sexually posed her, wrapped her up in the bed sheets, and then hid her in the attic. And it was obviously thought that if he could, he would have tried to get rid of the body. So he's put her in the attic. He probably thought that he would move her at a later date when nobody was around, but the police and media and the family kind of set siege on his house. They were there all the time. His family was there always trying to do search parties and do these things to look for her. The police kind of suspected him anyway, in a sense, so they were constantly doing searches. He never actually got the chance to move a body. And because of this, he wasn't able to dispose of her body, and the eventual smell of it led them to her. On the 14th of May 2013, Stewart Hazel was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 38 years. This would mean that he would be 75 when he would come up for the chance of appeal. Whether it would be granted is another question. His neighbour that also had clearly lied about seeing Tia coming from the house and leaving, and we don't know his motive behind that, he actually got sentenced to 5 months in prison for wasting police time. Now, whether Stewart had maybe asked them to say this or they just did it off their own back, I have no idea the reason behind it, but he did serve time for this as well. And if he hadn't have said that in the first place, the police probably would have searched Stewart's house more thoroughly. Because his story was kind of backed up with a neighbour also seeing her leave, they were more inclined to believe him and maybe didn't do it as thoroughly as they would have if they suspected him. A lot of the time it seems like they have a certain age range that they prefer, in a sense, and this may have been the case with Stewart. Maybe he was lying in wait until, in his eyes, Tia became old enough into his age range that he kind of liked, and that's when he decided it was time to make his move. Like I said, at the time of getting with Christine, Tia was only 2 years old. He waited 10 years, or at least as far as we know, built up their relations, and basically became best friends with Tia. She thought their relationship was one thing, whereas he thought it was something entirely different. I really think this case is so sad. Tia was only 12 years old. She trusted and loved that man, and he was a monster in disguise, nestled deep within a family, just waiting for the opportunity to pounce. And it just breaks my heart that everyone had so much trust in him. You would, after 10 years. 10 years of being in your family, 10 years of loving your child like his own grandchild. You do trust someone. Why, after all that time, did he then decide to murder Tia? Nobody will ever know, really. Anyway, guys, that's all I have on the murder of Tia Sharp. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye.